Not only did prominent American educators such as John Witherspoon equip students with a biblical foundation in academic education, but they were so committed to sound education for all students that they directly confronted 2 centuries of tradition and law imposed on them by the British and founded some of the first schools for women and for African Americans, something unheard of at that time. For example, John Witherspoon personally trained a number of African American students at Princeton, including John Chavez, who went on to become a famous preacher and educator in North Carolina. And Francis Hopkinson, a signer of the Declaration, was also instrumental in the early development of African American education. And Benjamin Franklin, a signer of both the Declaration and the Constitution, helped found a series of schools for African Americans, training students both in academics and in the principles of Christianity. And Benjamin Rush, another signer of the Declaration, helped open education for women and was intimately involved with the first American school to educate women. These founding fathers and many others set a new direction for education by pioneering education for all children, regardless of race or gender. As you get to 1690, Connecticut had a very interesting illiteracy law in 1690 because they're trying to wipe out illiteracy here. They've started public schools. They've got this going in Connecticut, Massachusetts, other New England areas. In 1690, they passed a law that says it's come to the attention of the general court, and the court then was the legislative court, come to the attention of the general court that there are still youth among us who can't read. They said, notwithstanding our former orders to this, that they're still there. And they said, if these young people cannot read, then they cannot read the holy word of God or the laws of this colony to judge against the word of God. So they're saying, we've got to stop this. We've got some people who can't read, which means they can't read the scriptures. They can't judge the laws of civil government against the scriptures, which means we in civil government might pass a bad law and you guys wouldn't stop us. You know, we get back into these atrocities like we had in Europe. So that they actually sent inspectors into the homes of parents to test the children to make sure they could read. Because if they could not read, they fined you $25. And back then, $25 is a lot of money. But they were dead serious about we're not going to have illiteracy. Illiteracy is what allows a nation to go in the wrong direction. You can be led by autocratic leaders. You can be led by leaders in church and state. You can be led by media. You can be led by anything if you can't read and think for yourself. So we were focused on this again. But again, that law says you got to know the Word of God. That's why we want you to read so you can judge things by that standard. Well, we continue to move across time, and as you look even at our university system, now it was Christians that really birthed the common school system, but the first university that was successful in America was Harvard. Where'd that come from? Puritan minister John Harvard. Well, we've got Yale. Where'd that come from? 10 Congregationalist ministers started Yale. Well, you can go into William and Mary. How about that? Episcopal minister William Blair. Well, how about Princeton? Well, that came from Presbyterian minister William Tennant. Well, how about Dartmouth? That came from a Congregational minister, Eleazar Wheelock. I mean, it was preachers starting all these universities across. That's where the whole concept of higher education came from, was out of the church. And you'll find that we remain that way for century after century. Now, we see education today is really secular. You know, you can't have religious people there, and if you're a teacher, you got to keep your faith in the closet. By the time we got to 1860 in America, 262 of the 288 university presidents were ministers of the gospel. So who's in charge of universities even by 1860? You know, 95% are still run by ministers of the gospel. And by the way, nearly 1/3 of all faculty members at all the universities in America in 1860 were also ministers of the gospel. See, education and Christianity have been tied together. Congress itself, even back in 1838, Congress passed a law dealing with chaplains. Because when we first had chaplains in the early part of the military, chaplains just went out when the forces went out. Right. We didn't keep bases. We didn't have an army really between wars. They went back home. But in the 1830s, we started building forts and posts across America and started having permanent stations for these guys, which meant we need permanent chaplains. 1838, Congress passed a law that said the chaplain would also serve as a schoolmaster on every post. So chaplains are also teachers. But that's the way it was in America. So by the time we get to 1860, 95% of the colleges are run by ministers of the gospel. And even as you get to 1884, by 1884 we had 370 universities in America. 83% of those universities were still tied to some denomination in some way. They were denominational universities. I mean, our whole concept of successful education, America rose above all other nations in the world. And it wasn't because we had a secular education system. It was literally because we included the principles of Christianity.